Dear distinguished delegates from the different member states, members of the Arts Councils present here today, since I missed the first day when you established the protocol, with your permission, let me recognize the protocol that was established for this summit, and I say good morning to all of you. I'm not seeing a response. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My name is Boyson Ngondo. I'm the Deputy Director for Heritage and Culture Programs in the Ministry tasked with Education, Arts and Culture in Namibia. And I'm happy that I was accorded this opportunity to be your moderator for the next session. It's going to be a learning experience also for me, so bear with me. Please don't judge some of the nervous reactions you may see. My task is to moderate on the topic of the opportunities and challenges facing arts councils and government when it comes to the creative industry. We know that the Millennium Development Goals came and passed without really having recognized the role of arts and culture as far as development is concerned. I'm sure you also know about the long discourse of the relationship between culture and development when it comes to culture and arts being enablers and drivers of development. But I think we have all seen the good news that the Sustainable Development Goals at least have made an attempt to recognize the role that arts and culture plays in sustainable development. We know also that the African Union, through the Agenda 2063, have also made attempts to recognize the importance of this sector to development. And also at national levels, governments have begun to recognize the role that arts and culture plays in development. Point in case, in the Namibian context, for the first time, culture and arts is a standalone priority in our national development plan. Therefore, states and governments are beginning to recognize the role that the sector plays in development. Therefore, this session will attempt to unearth some of the opportunities that we have, that we still need to tap on in order to make this relationship very clear. We know that we are also challenged to demonstrate how the sector contributes to other areas, poverty alleviation, the GDP of our different countries, and also to uplifting the livelihoods of our communities. So this session will also unearth some of those opportunities and challenges that we face in developing the sector. Having said that, I'm not going to be the speaker. Okay. Yes. What I will do now, I will call all the panelists for this session, starting with the first panelist, who is going to be Dean Molebatsi. Please, if I misspell your name, as I said, I'm still learning. If you can please forgive me. Who is the Deputy Director of Arts and Culture in the Ministry of Youth Empowerment, Sport, Culture Development from Botswana. Can I please get a reaction? Thank you so much. Welcome, sir. Molebatsi.
Molebatsi. It's B-A, not B-E. So kindly.
Yes, so I think we took note of that, and I'm already forgiven at my first attempt. The second panelist who will join us is none other than Mr. Patrick Sem, the Chairperson of the National Arts Council of Namibia. Can we have a symbiotic relation? Thank you so much. That's what I'm expecting. Third panelist, Monde Gwaba. Again, but I'm getting there, right? Welcome, welcome. And our fourth panelist is going to be Rosemary. I'm in trouble today, but I will try my best. Mangope. Is that right? The audience will correct. Please, can you help me with that? There you have it. So thank you. Now that I have the panelists ready, I feel pity because Patrick is used to big moderating sessions. I wish he could help me to facilitate this one. What I'm going to do in terms of how we are going to approach this, I'll give each panelist a few minutes to just have some introductory reflections on the topic, after which I will pose some questions with the power vested in me, and then I'm going to open the floor for interventions from the delegates. If I have your permission, then I will start. They say you start with the ladies first, so I will start on my extreme right and allow each panelist an opportunity to have some introductory remarks from where we can then facilitate our conversation this morning. My sister.
Thank you. In my opening remarks, I have to tell you that you all saw on the program that it's Angela Martins, right? But in the spirit of service, Patrick told me 2 seconds ago that I'm filling in for Angela Martins. I agreed because we should always be ready to step into the gap. And just in terms of our sector, we need to understand that if you're a practitioner or an activist or a servant of the people, stepping into the gap is what's required. The topic at hand is about the challenges. So in terms of the opening remarks, I really would like to say, I start from a premise that challenges are always opportunities. And those of us that were here yesterday and we watched the last panel, I would like to bring it closer to home. We had 3 dynamic speakers, all of whom had been propelled into success by finding a solution to the need. So finding a solution to the need in recognizing the challenge, it is not about wallowing in what you cannot do. It is about finding out through networks what you can actually do. So I would actually like to set the tone in terms of the challenges that we'll be talking about by saying, even though we would be saying where the challenges are led by you, facilitator, we would need to be saying, more than the challenges, what is it that we are going to do about it?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Can I please call you Ms. Rosemary? Thank you so much for those immediate reactions. I think the message is very clear. Let's take these challenges and turn them into opportunities. My sister, if you can also please take the floor.
Good morning, everybody. As introduced, I'm Monde Gwaba from Zambia. I want to follow on what Rosemary has just said. Having been in this room the past 2-3 days, even though I know that we have challenges back home in Zambia, I would want to start on a positive note that those challenges that I know that we have back home, my task as I go back home is to transform them into opportunities. Because I've seen and I've observed that the creative industry becomes a challenge because we tend to think within ourselves, within our sectors. We should start thinking outside the box. And so, even as I mentioned that we have challenges of limited capacities, technical, financial, those are issues that we should start transforming into our own jobs, into creating employment and creating wealth for ourselves. So I would give chance to the next speaker and then come back with my opportunities.
That my sister want to take my role. Please leave that to me. I'll pass the mic to the next speaker. I think the message also that you are bringing forth resonates with what Ms. Rosemary have already said in terms of transforming these challenges into opportunities. And I think later on we'll come to some concrete examples on how we can do that, so that we can, as an outcome of this session, have some concrete ideas on how we can take some of the challenges and turn them into opportunities for the sector in general. I now have the honor to ask Mr. Patrick Sem to take a few minutes also and have some introductory statement.
I think the biggest challenge in terms of the status quo, so you all know the problems, they are there, they are real, but I think the challenge is the governance. It's because if you have the inability to respond to any challenge, that means you can't govern. Right? So the structures, the systems, the policies, the institutions become very imperative. Leadership becomes very important. So whether it's at a school, if the school says we are failing, 80% of our students are failing, my question would then be, how does school management respond to that? So we have a governance issue. I think in terms of, are the institutions in the right place? Do we have the right leaders? Are the people informed about the potential information that exists? So I generally will put it under a governance framework, because the point of leadership is to be able to respond to whatever reality that you're experiencing. So you have to be strategic in how you respond to that. So for me, and I think in our experience, and to be quite frank about the Namibian context, was that the Namibian Art Council, before we were mandated 2 years ago, was suspended for 3 years. So there was a 3-year gap in not having a National Art Council as a result of mismanagement and lack of policies and a lack of systems, a lack of controls and balances. So the first point is your house must be clean. So a lot of the houses aren't clean. And taking the time to clean up what was left took us about 2 years. 7 years of audited reports had to be done. We had to then create policies in order to make sure there is no mismanagement. And the artists, at the end of the day, just want access and opportunity, and they want to show cost. So there's a disconnect between the state of the institution and then the demands from the public. There's almost like a false expectation. So you can't give money because we took a year to clean up the house. So I think it's about leadership. And this is my point, comes in terms of a democratic space. I think there's a lack of citizen participation, and a lack of participation leads to a lack of accountability. Right? So there's a democratic deficit here between where we want to be and where we are. And in order to bridge that gap, you need citizens to participate, and your lack of participation leads to a lack of accountability. And so Freddie the other day was saying, they must start over again. And it's true, because if he doesn't share that, if he doesn't participate, we will not be accountable, because nobody is holding us accountable. So I think it's important to serve those roles as activists, to participate in these platforms, to be here. A lot of the artists aren't even here that could have benefited from here. So I think there's a lack of participation from the citizen, and there's a lack of institutions, policies, systems from the system. And because of the lack of that, it leads to a lack of resources that are being put into the sector. If you don't get onto your NDPs, you don't get the money. At least you don't get the majority of the chunk of the money that you need. And our sector covers a huge spectrum. So the problem is resources, it is the institutional arrangements, and then it's a lack of participation on the citizens' behalf to then hold the elected leaders accountable.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Patrick Sem. I think you have touched on a number of issues which we'll still come back to try and get some of those answers to those questions and issues that you are raising. Now let me also allow the fourth and final panelist to have the introductory statement. If I can also, with your permission, call you Mr. Dean. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know where to start, but I'll go about it this way. I think right now we have a great opportunity because of the changing political landscape in Africa. I think there's a major preponderance towards democratic states, and when you look at the landscape, the political landscape, the politicians are becoming younger and younger. They are well-schooled, I think, highly educated, and I think this is a major opportunity for us in the creative sector to harness this energy of these young guys who are now in politics. I think years ago we didn't have this. It was largely elderly men and women, and I'm sure in certain cases. But there's a major shift here, and like just looking at the four of us and the countries we are from, the leaders have become a bit younger. Obviously, my president is a couple of years older than I am. Okay, maybe in Namibia it's different. In Zambia, much younger. In South Africa, much. So there's been a shift, and that shift, I think, it's a big opportunity for us. And I think this is a place where we can start. So this is one thing that I also think that the other thing is that I think we have battled creating an institutional framework of the best kind. But I think we have a great opportunity even then, now, to create a framework which we want, and in a way that we would like it to be. Not Eurocentric, not I don't know if there's anything called American-centric or whatever other centric, but Afrocentric in nature, in shape, and in perspective. We need to go about this in this way, because we realize, although we want to claim to be part of the broader framework and part of the global network, and we have to find a way to place ourselves to be part of that global network in a way that we want it, so that it's just not pushed on us, because that has been the way things are, and or things have been. So maybe we need a way to change this. So clearly for me, these are some of the places for us to start. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One thing I'm proud of is that my panelists are also relatively young, so I'm safe, no? Picking on your assessment, which I think is also a positive note to the creative sector in general. My question again, coming back to the panelists, because what I want to achieve is to have at least 9 concrete actions that are required to change the landscape of the creative industry. So I'll give again all panelists an opportunity to give me 3, even if it is firing the minister, but I don't want that. What I want is to say, if I had an opportunity to change the landscape of the creative sector, I will do 1, 2, 3. And I want the rapporteur to take note, even the commas, in terms of these projects, because that will, I think, help us in identifying those actions that we need to take to change the landscape of the creative sector. So I will start again, the same sequence. If you can highlight those 3 or 2 concrete changes that we need to take as an action moving forward.
I would articulate them as follows. The first is institutional arrangements. What I mean by that is that for anything to take off, you need to position it within a particular framework. Patrick touched on the governance issue, but then I would take it further and say the establishment of a board or a council or a kind of leadership structure that's going to be leading the entity, particularly in the creative sectors. Currently, the creative sector is split within a variety of departments. And these departments are still working in a silo form. In other words, you have your trade and industry, you have your Department of Arts and Culture, you have your Department of Education, you have a Department of Health, and so on and so forth. And yet, when we speak about the creative and cultural economy, it cuts across all these departments. So it's very important to have intersectionality. Okay, so the first challenge is the lack of coordination and intersectionality or multidisciplinary forms of working across all these silos that are called government entities. So an institutional kind of arrangement is necessary. The second is the capacity of people that are nominated to serve in order to drive those entities. One of the greatest challenges, for example, is that people are appointed or nominated to positions. Some of them are political appointments, some of them not. But if we were to look at the bouquet of skills and the bouquet of capacity that you need to drive that entity, you need to have several levels of what I call capacity. The first is financial. No, actually, the first is strategic. So understanding where you want to drive this entity to. The second is financial. Your ability to resource whatever it is that you do, but also to account for whatever fiscus comes in what needs to be done in such a way that it's transparent, people know where the money is all about. The third is about the quality of input that is supposed to be leading to qualitative output. If I were to make a typical example, as a National Arts Council, we call for applications in order to answer for particular things. But right now, we have even changed our format of how we call for applications because it has to be about relevance. Whatever it is that we do has got to be addressing a particular need. It's got to be relevant to what is actually needed in a very in-depth form. For example, one of my favorite photographers, and I shouldn't say who in the room, came to me this morning as soon as I walked up and he said, you know, Ma, I really have a problem. I have children. I come from the north of the country. And one of my children is actually failing English as a subject, and yet English is being used as a medium of instruction in everything that he's got in other subjects. He's passing all these other subjects, but he's failing English. And I'm wondering, how does he pass subjects when he fails or she fails the medium of instruction? So what I'm saying is the qualitative input leads to the qualitative output. So it is important to understand, first, relevance. Why are we spending this money? To what end are we spending this money? And as we call for applications, are these applications answering for a need in the country? Are they relevant? Again, to state a typical example, the National Arts Council is a grant funding entity. And we've been funding according to specific disciplines. In other words, we'd be calling for applications in visual arts, in dance, in drama, in music, in crafts, in literature, and in platforms, which is your festivals. But the reality is, the world of the arts has shifted. And everything is now transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. It is not unusual to find somebody doing a spoken word, to somebody playing music, and somebody else doing a painting, which is visual arts. So when an application comes, and then it's got all those elements, where do you take it? And you have put up a structure that adjudicates on music, that would then shift that to multidisciplinary. All of a sudden, everything then becomes multidisciplinary. So we had to change the way we were working. And we structured this according to programs. For example, we have 5 programs now. The first is social cohesion and nation building. Because in everything that we do, we want a cohesive society and we want to build a nation. So the first program is social cohesion and nation building. The second is innovation, creativity, and design, which is to promote the creative and cultural industries, but to get people to innovate. The third is capacity building. You cannot do any of this if you don't have instruments that are going to be promoting creativity, innovation, and design, including how you then create structures in your society to begin to build, create, and resource what will then feed into your innovation, creativity, and design. So capacity building is very important. And then we have strategic initiatives. At any given time in our societies, we are always presented with challenges. For example, if there was a need, let's say Ebola, and then you need to be reacting to how you're going to be managing the scourge of Ebola. And so a strategic initiative would be, you would then be calling for interventions through applications, but to address this particular need. So those are opportunistic in type. They are not ordinary. And they may also be commissioned because the country would like to be answering for a particular need. And then the last one that we had has got to do with environmental sustainability. We are destroying our environment. So it is very important that everything that we do should have a semblance of dealing with how you protect the environment. So as the applications come and you apply as a dancer, tell us how your particular discipline is going to be addressing the need for environmental sustainability, such as what Ricardo presented yesterday about Abdoulaye Diallo from Senegal, who is a choreographer who did a piece of work about cleaning up the environment. And it was very touching because at the end of that piece, he actually called up the audience to come and clean up the stage. Now, I don't think people that were participants at that particular initiative would ever go and litter ever again. Do you know what I'm saying? So it is about calling and funding programs that are answering for a need in society. So staying relevant is a challenge.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think, yes. Thank you for such a comprehensive response. And I think a number of issues are coming out very clearly, especially the issue of staying relevant, being responsive to needs and current situations. I think that's a challenge to the whole development fraternity in terms of staying with time. So what it means is if you have either institutional or policy frameworks that are relevant, that were relevant 20 years ago, it's important to have that constant reflective thinking and revisiting some of those tools to remain relevant. Then I will also ask my second panelist to have some reflections on that question of the actions that are agent actions that we can take to change the landscape of the creative industry, especially in relation to the regional integration for SADC countries in terms of what can be done to change the landscape of the sector. The floor is yours, my sister.
Thank you very much. I will attempt to bring out the concrete actions by aligning them to what we call the existing challenges. For me, in Zambia, I can say that we have the political environment. The political will that has emerged since 2016, 2017 avails us an opportunity to address the financial gaps. Because when there is political will, the structural problems that exist, the technical gaps that are there, they tend to be aligned with the existing policies. So in my case, I would say that the creative industry should exploit the existing political environment by enabling the artists, the cultural practitioners to come out and be more creative because the political will is there. There is also the growing market economy. So combined with political will, the young people, the artists that may be emerging now, have this advantage that they have technology. They can exploit technology. We witnessed yesterday from the testimonies from the young entrepreneurs that they are using technology. They are exploiting it to the extent that they are even able to create wealth for other people. They are able to improve the lives of the other people within their communities. So in the same manner, as we reconceptualize the cultural field, the art world, we need to really exploit this area. I may not be in that age, but I would want to exploit the fact that we have shared ideas here, we have shared knowledge here, and that we live in the same region, that we can actually avail these experiences closer home. We bring them into our countries and bring the young people and get them live out of the small boxes that they have been in. What do I mean by that? Our young people have lived believing that governments out there should be the ones to avail capital for them. They have lived with this dependence syndrome. But the growing market economy can actually change their mindset. And secondly, my country also has the 7th National Development Plan. Within this plan, the tourism sector has been given the space, and the space that has been elevated. The Ministry of Tourism or the tourism sector has been given as the second driver of our economy. And with that, the cultural and art sector gets an opportunity really to contribute to the implementable actions within the 7th National Development Plan. And also this elevates the sector to a point where you can present the issues that are concrete enough, convincing enough to the authorities, and really get a better part of the budget as you align the 7th National Development Plan to the lives of the people and to improving their lives, as well as elevating the tourism sector to a point where it becomes attractive, it will attract more arrivals and improve and contribute to the GDP of the economy. So I think the political environment, the digital era, and our own national plans can actually contribute to improving the status of the arts and culture as a creative economy.
Thank you so much. I think we have part of our three projects that we can already add to the list. Thank you so much for being so elaborative. We are conscious of time. We will try to, when we go to the dialogue with the delegates, try to manage a little bit. But I thought it was necessary to have those details so that the session adds value to the sector rather than just being a mere discussion. So, Mr. Patrick Sem, the floor is yours to have some reflections on the same question.
I think the first thing is we have false expectations. So we expect, when we say we're artists, we need money, that the government is going to give you money. The true thing is there's limited resources and there's competing priorities. So you need to understand the context and the landscape which you are functioning in socioeconomically, politically, and then make a high-stakes argument or not one. But I think there's a false expectation with the amount of competing interests. We have health issues, we have education issues, we have infrastructure issues. How do we then end up prioritizing the cultural and the creative sector? And I think when we speak the language, the way we speak about it needs to change. So in my negotiations, whether it's with government, I don't ever think that they're doing me a favor. I'm like, you have 37% unemployment, you need to create more jobs, you need to respect your constitutional mandate which talks about the pursuit of happiness. When there's poverty, there's no happiness. So already the frameworks exist in saying that you, as the government, have this mandate. You have a mandate to make sure that people are happy. You have a mandate to make sure people have access and opportunity. You have a mandate to take people out of poverty. I'm helping you. I'm doing you a favor. How am I doing you a favor? We have a fund. Our house is clean. Give us more money. We can redistribute it. How do we then redistribute it? But I think that is the first thing. This beggar mentality just needs to stop, because I know that we are adding value to it, and therefore, government's not doing me a favor. I'm doing government a favor while being a government agency. Right? That's important, because that's their mandate. People voted, you told them, that's your strategy. We're aiding you. We're giving you a vehicle to drive your vision. So I think we need to have not an arrogance, but a confidence in terms of the work that we're doing. And sometimes it's like, it's amazing how people come out of poor households and they do well. People come out of rich households and they do well. Sometimes when you come a rich or poor household, you don't do well. But the reality is there enough care and support in those households? Because that's the driving factor, whether you're poor or rich. So for yourself, do you care in terms of psychosocial? We talk about depression amongst the artist community. Do you care to do better? Do you have resilience to come out of that? So it's important to understand that it's an agency thing. It's a power thing. Do you have the power to change your reality? And I think a lot of the people feel defeated. That's just not attractive. It's not going to change a cause. It's like, if you're already defeated, continue being defeated. I just don't even want to help you. It's not inspiring. Humans aren't inspired by that, right? So it's important to change the spirit in which you come from and how you engage, how you speak about it, and how you engage politicians. Because there's a difference between, and I want to say there's a lot of the time people, you ask them about politics and they're like, I don't like politics. How do you not like a place that makes decisions that affects your lives? It doesn't make sense to me. And I know why. You confuse politics for politicians. And you allow politicians to contaminate politics, which is being in places where decisions are made that are fundamental, and then you make them win. Why? Because you don't participate, and now it's like, you don't care, I don't care, I can do whatever I want. It's a party out here. Yeah? So it's important in changing the spirit and then the language in which we engage, and then the evidence that we then provide to substantiate our point. So that's my second point, the research. And now, being a researcher myself and coming from a research background, there's always a thing that we call an evidence-based. There's a publication bias. So if I do research and I find out it's not significant, I've spent 3 years doing this, I'm not going to throw that research away. I'm going to make it significant. So a lot of the research and the evidence that is produced has a publication bias. So not everything that is studied or statistically proven is actually relevant. Right? So yes, we need to do research, but once we have done it, we need to understand publication bias, because research can be manipulated in how you construct the variables. So yes, and this is what happens in the US a lot with education results. All right? So it's important to change the spirit. It's important then to sensitize through research. And it's important to look at the methodology. A lot of people, when you're looking at research, the first thing most people do is look at the findings. Really, you must look at the methodology first. How did you acquire that? Because that'll give you the validity or the relevance in terms of the outcomes that are coming. So methodology is very key in terms of establishing research. And I think we had a meeting yesterday with Wits, Rosemary, and myself. So we want to create a toolkit for the region to be able to understand what the value of the creative economy is, both culturally, socially, economically, but using things like videography and blogging and things that are more relevant in terms of how we tell that story. I think telling the narrative is very important. And then the last point I want to get onto is this idea of, as an individual. And it's an important point, because I think sometimes we talk about Africa and we say, we want to break the borders. And then when we say, where must the resources go? Just to Namibians. So there's a confusion in terms of wanting to decolonize, but at the same time having the habits of colonialism. Right? So you're saying, why must the Chinese come here? The Chinese came here because you created a gap. You are responsible for that gap. So why are you blaming somebody else that's coming from somewhere, and you're not taking responsibility for the fact that you have created the gap as a lack of inaction on your part? You have given them the opportunity, and they've taken it. And it's human nature to take opportunities. I'm like, if there's a bulk $1 million in that, and you say, Patrick, you can have it, I'm going to be like, no, it's Chinese money. No, I'm taking the $1 million because the opportunity is there. Right? So we don't internalize value. There's a shift and a shift in burden. Now, this is what I talk about, like the global value chains. So I loved Brenda's example yesterday, and I think that's what I talk about. The ideal is to decolonize, but our actions are actually colonial. So when yesterday somebody asked Brenda, why aren't your glasses African? She says, that was my first idea. I made them, and nobody bought them. You are not putting your money where your mouths are. So we have this idea that we want to be African, but I just don't know where those glasses, it just looks, I don't like it. They look African. So it's very confusing. It's like bipolar syndrome. I don't know what it is. It's schizophrenia, but it's like a mental illness. It's a psychosocial issue. It's like you want to embrace the thing, but you're not embracing the thing. All right? So there needs to be actually commitment towards where you're going to, what basket you're going to put your eggs in. And I think that's important in terms of creating a global market. If you yourself aren't consuming the things that you're producing, how do you expect the rest of the world to do it? That doesn't happen. In America, Americans watch American movies. They watch American clothes. Rockaway, they endorse, and not just that, they invest. And investment is not just a top-down thing. When I buy Meme Shalongo's Fiat schooner, and that's a campaign we're working on, walking in our own shoes. So trying to change schools to wear locally produced shoes. There's 707, what did the PS, there's 1,884 schools, but 722,000 learners. Right? If you just calculate each learner buying a shoe for $200, because toughies are around $300 right now, that's $144 million into the economy by changing an attitude. Right? So I think we're not putting our commitment and our to where it's actually needed. We still colonized. We still think things that come from a foreign are still better. We don't invest in our own things, and I think that's a problem in how we tell the narrative.
Thank you so much. I don't want to attempt to summarize that. But I think what I wanted to add on the issue of statistics and research is a particular challenge to the sector. Say for argument's sake, you sit in a meeting, a budget meeting, and other sectors are putting forth their contribution to GDP, the amount of employment that they create, and the impact they have on people's livelihoods. The sector struggles to make those arguments because of lack of statistics. So it's one area also that I didn't want us to leave it hanging, because it is significant, not only for the sector to receive funding, but the sector to understand its position as it concerns development. So it's a very important area that I wanted to just throw in there, which I think we need to somehow reflect and also concretize some actions in coming up with a framework that answer this issue of evidence-based solutions to problems. Thank you so much for that. My brother, Mr. Dean, you have now an opportunity to somehow link the dots and give me a summary of the points that the colleagues have raised, but also throwing in some of your ideas to seal the deal, and then we can open up for some interventions from the floor. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm not sure I'll be able to put all these points together. I think they're already well articulated and, summed up well, so I don't want to mess with their submissions. And I just think that, we in Africa, I don't know if we are slow to learn or we just too laid back, and so it takes us time to recognize opportunity, and this is a place where we've started development, and I think that's why maybe we're still where we are. Look, I'll give you two clear examples. The Trans-Kalahari opened up. Now, I'm not sure in terms of this side of the border, from here down to Mamuno border. I don't know what's going on there in terms of the creative economy, but I think there's huge opportunity because traffic has opened up on this road. Now, on the other side, however, and I just happen to be lucky because I'm in charge of programming across the ministry, so I travel quite extensively, and I know that across the border in Botswana, there's literally not much going on. In terms of creatives doing work and putting it up along the road and you know, in between the places that exist there. And I think there's great opportunity because the traffic there has just blossomed over time. So these are some of the things that I think practically we have to be looking at. And I'd like to challenge guys from Namibia to look at that road and think about practically what they can do, even cross-border collaborations just along this road. Because there's so many people traveling between here and Johannesburg and Pretoria and all the other places, and so that's one place where I think we have great opportunity here, which we are not utilizing. Now I can also tell you this, you know, still based on the logic that sometimes we are slow to take up things. Urbanization in Africa, it's one of those things that sometimes takes very quick shape. I mean, in Botswana now, there's a place called Palape, and it's basically somewhere in the center of, I don't know what to call it, Dr. Mangope. I don't know if I'll call it at the center of the country because it's not exactly at the center, but it's placed very well in the middle of the country somewhere, and it has quickly urbanized. I mean, like, it was... it has taken shape so quickly. A town has just grown. I mean, I don't know how many malls I'm seeing that have just mushroomed in that place. And when I come into that town, I'm not seeing much in terms of creatives being at work to take up opportunity. And I think there's a hell lot going on there in terms of business coming into the town, in terms of investment coming into the town. So clearly this is an area where we are still weak. And I'm sure this also applies in other parts of Africa. And I've always protested in Botswana the fact that some of our mining towns, and it's a story that you can tell even about South Africa. That old mining town, what is it called, where the diamonds were? Kimberley. And these are cities. These should be huge cities by now, and there should be a lot of creative work that you would find in those places. But so we have places like Orapa, which is a very old mining town. We have Jwaneng, which is on the Trans-Kalahari. And there's absolutely nothing there. So I think we need to learn to take up opportunity. And I don't know, I'm not a creative myself. I'm just a lousy arts administrator that is trying to shape policy that would then, but half the time I need to be learning from the people who, you know. So in my crystal ball right now, I think it is inability, or maybe it's just how laid back we are in Africa. The second point that I would really like to make is the whole issue of human capital development. This is a need right now. I think, I don't know if it's the responsibility of governments or business or ourselves to invest in skills that are necessary for us to grow the sector. So maybe we also have to be thinking very seriously about the skills that are necessary. And I can recall Rosemary talking to the whole issue of the cross pollination of ideas across subsectors, music, poetry, and we need this more and more now. So clearly, it's a bit pedestrian for us to just go back to government, and this is the challenge for government agencies. Clearly, I mean, as an official of government, I know that one of my mega frustrations is the fact that we're not putting sufficient money in training our people. But I'm also seeing our people making money and just gobbling it up in other things. and you are all elderly people, you know what I mean. And I think we have to be investing in our children. We have to be investing in ourselves, because I think the time has come. And as a concluding point, really, I want to just say, look, I'm one of those that are really, really frustrated by this. You know, there's a problem in terms of interface between the creatives and policymakers and us who are sitting in the middle, being your government officials and your public policy specialists or whatever the name may be. There's always a disconnect. So it's politicians on the one side, and then it's us in the middle, and it's the creatives. We never seem to have a clear meeting point. Because when we do meet at all times, I think it's just accusations and just throwing stones at each other, and because we need to harmonize. We need harmonized platforms. I don't know how we could create that, where clearly we can bring in the policymakers and make sure that they understand. And as I said earlier, increasingly we are having these younger people coming into politics, and we have to harness this, because it's an opportunity lost if we don't try. So I think basically this would be how I see us moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that very good and short summary of the discussions. I think now, with the permission of the organizers, we have about 25 minutes, and I see that I have more than 10 questions. I don't know if I'm allowed to then exhaust the 25 minutes. Can I get some direction so that we wrap up by lunchtime? I think it's a very interesting session. So what I will do, please, we are moving in what I will call a brief session. What it means is that when you pose your question, you are very brief. And I also call upon my panelists that when they respond, they are also brief and to the point, so that everybody gets an opportunity and nobody feels left out. So what I'm going to do is, with your agreement, can I pack the 4 hands? I start this side, and then the 4 hands will take the second round. So still, I'm not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, and then I'll come to the middle of the row here. Let me go here. My brother there, the sister, and there at the back, the 5 people. From here, you will come from the second round. So can we pass the mic as we go along?
Should I start?
Yes.
Okay.
If you don't mind, if you want to ask a specific question, can you please direct it to the panelists, so that, because my notebook is full right now, so that they can take the notes themselves. Yes.
Okay. Mine is more just to enhance on what was said from the panelists when we're speaking about accountability. And I think accountability shouldn't just be within the members of the Arts Council or the members of different ministries. I think it should also come to us who are coming asking for funding. Because one thing that I noticed from the previous members of the National Arts Council is they would give money, but there is really no accountability. You know, you give money to an artist, he goes, he releases an album, but next year he comes again for more money, and you want to find out how well did your album do. You find people constantly getting money, but they're not selling, they're not getting shows, they're not getting bookings. But there's artists out there who are actually really working hard, but they don't get those opportunities. So I think every year there should be accountability as to who you're giving the money to and what they've done with it. The other thing I would also like to stress on is we, as the Arts Council, not to look at all artists as equal. You know, you can't say we'll give every artist 30,000, for example. Every person has a different dream. Every person has different ideas in what they want to do. What we need to do is scrutinize what exactly it is they're doing and how it is they're doing it, and does it really work? Like the madam said, relevance. How relevant are you? We cannot give money to an artist who's been in the industry for, say, 20 years, and you're still asking for funding. What have you done for the past 20 years that you're not able to fund yourself at this point in time? So I think those are some of the things we have to start looking at when we're allocating money to artists. Yeah,
thank you so much. I think those were just contributions and well taken. The brother, my sister, and then you go at the back, please.
Okay. I want to touch on what Mr. Patrick said, false expectations. I would say, or recommend to you by saying, lack of information is what actually causes or leads to false expectations. So I would recommend you as the chairperson of the Art Council to, if you have such events like promotions or things, like notify the artist, notify the nation or whatever the crowd is, you know. We should know, like, and try to organize it in the reach of the people. Imagine I had to walk from where I stayed to this site. You know, who does that? If you don't want, you know, if you don't really want to be there. You know, some people want to be here, but not really. So he wouldn't make an effort to fit from Eros like I do, or just like I did. So I try to look at us also. Try to do things that we can also afford, you know, and bring the information in the right way.
Thank you so much. Again, it's just a contribution, more improved communication, bringing service closer to the people. Yes, my sister?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Kapena Ngushu-Avetira, founder director of CHIL Namibia Arts Education for Development. And I would really want to first say thank you to the Arts Council for bringing this event to us. I recently returned from America, from the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program, which is a 6-week program in the US where we learn about NGO management, fundraising, and all these things. So coming from an NGO that educates arts and culture, I came to learn that sometimes the Arts Council give money for like projects. Let me say a project where I'm doing guitar lessons, and then they buy me guitars, and then I can't sustain the project because I need the money to pay the arts educators who are going to teach the arts lesson. So I would recommend that maybe in the future, even if it's not now, that the Arts Council look into projects that create employment for artists or arts educators, because I had to do statistics on like even setting up an HR department for the arts. But then it was very difficult for me because we do not have a market for arts educators. How much must I pay an artist who's teaching a guitar at my institution? So it's very difficult for me, even my interns who are working with me, to set up a market for the arts, for the artists. How much must a dance teacher be paid per hour? So if the Arts Council can look into projects that will give funding to employment for job creation, that will really help us to set a market for the arts. And then rather than buying me a guitar that will be parked for 3 years in my garage because there's no one to teach, because there's no support, because we do go, I run the NGO for 5 years now. We do go to other companies where we ask for sponsorship, but they ask us, why don't you get it from the Arts Council? Because we do not fund for management support. So if the Arts Council could fund the management support, and then we can do the projects from the other grants that we get from elsewhere, that will really help us.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that one is also just a general contribution. And I recall one of the presenters yesterday raised that issue of the gap between the capital projects vis-a-vis operational budget. And I think that's also just for noting. Yes, my brother.
Okay. My name is Sonabile Mangope. I come from the National Heritage Council of South Africa. Thanks so much as well for this kind of reflections from our panelists. The creative sector is the most important sector in any society. It is the barometer on which to measure the mood of society. But unless it takes itself seriously, nobody will take creative industry seriously. There's this, I would just want to raise three things as actionable points. There's this syndrome of statism. What is the syndrome of statism? Is that we mimic the state and not the state mimicking us. I don't know how many times that politicians, must use creative industry for elections. And 5 years later on, you forget about the creative industry. You think about them and then another elections. Unless then we take the creative industry itself, take itself seriously. One of the things that must change is the policy paradigm. What is this policy paradigm? There's an issue of what they call supply-driven policies. It means that the state is busy supplying the arts culture to communities. Whereas we must change it to demand-driven. What is demand-driven? It says that there must be demand from the creative industry itself. It's not like the state is going around distributing culture like a bakery distributing, loaf of breads, and so forth. That is wrong, actually. That must change because we have now artists, actually, the state going around like in a bakery approach, distributing loaves of breads and quarters and so forth. That's the second thing. The third thing is the decolonization. I've heard actually speakers talk about this decolonization. I think that we must have a very, very kind of measured, approach of decolonizing our arts and culture. We can't see ourselves from the point of view of America. When America's coughs, we all sneeze. And then it then says that you need to have sort of this decolonization agenda, in the whole creative industry. Then the last thing that I want to raise in this issue, of course, that have been raised here, of governance. In governance, that is the governance, issue. You need to revisit the governance model. What is this governance model that we're talking about? We have a situation where, for instance, most of the creative in councils appointed by the ministers or by government. But you have a situation where creative people, all of us want to come to government, to come to these boards. And you find a situation where that, in terms of capabilities, we're not capable in terms of, say, managing, And therefore, all, creative people actually come to boards and play a role that they're not supposed to be playing. Leave governance to those people who are supposed to do governance. And creative people must sit on creativity themselves. Then that's when you're going to be able to measure that. So otherwise, in every country in SADC, you've got a problem of boards fighting. Boards are fighting because everybody wants a slice, and it's what I call competition for scarce resources, which is killing the arts. And that's why I'm therefore saying that allow the creative people to do what they're supposed to do, and governance must actually do what they're supposed to do to govern. And so even when you appoint the councils, there must be this separation or balance between the expertise for governance and as well as expertise for monitoring, creative industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Please, again, you can see how many hands I have to manage. I don't want to be disrespectful and cut you while you are speaking. May I again please appeal for us to be brief. Thank you that what you have done so far is just cementing what the panelists have raised. We will have some sort of a summative response at the end for those interventions. Please, let's be brief. 1 minute maximum.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm handing out kudos to Patrick and his Arts Council. I didn't really know the depth of the problems that you have faced since we left the Arts Council all those years ago. What I want to ask you in particular, what happened to the case, the theft of $1 million that was stolen from the Arts Council? That's the first question. Because we don't hear nothing about that theft. people are protected stealing from the state. I'd like you to respond to that. The person from Botswana, we're always ready to work with Botswana together. Right now, I have a proposal to give to you to try and help fight the AIDS pandemic in your country at school level. I'd like you to take this proposal with you to your Ministry of Education or your health services to consider that. We are always willing to extend our educational achievements on that level. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and thank you so much. The brother is ready for the proposal. My brother here, just in front, I come here, my brother in white, and then I will end there. Then we move over to this side. Please bear with me.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes.
Yes, my contribution is, I would like to see the art decentralization in Namibia. If you look at the creative industry, majority of the artists are coming from the rural area. But when you look at the budget and the people that are dominating in the art and the creative industry at the leadership level, they are just living in the urban area. So when you look at the cartoon that we got yesterday from the lady from Kenya, I look at our creative industry as a cow also that's getting fed by the rural area, but it's getting milked in the urban area only. I would like the National Art Councils and all the people that are involved in budgeting to make sure that the budget for the arts should be regional quotas allocated. You should do research that in your budget, how many, the southern part of the Namibia that benefited from your budget, in the north, in the east, Kavango, and also up to the Himba people there. There is nothing that you can do if you are not going to decentralize the art. The dream, the vision, the framework you are talking about there, it will be doomed if there is no action for decentralization. And that's part of democracy. To the people that are voting you, to make sure that they are reaping the fruits of your independence.
Thank you so much. I think that's also just a contribution. I have the two hands there, Mr. Big Ben, and then we'll move over to this side. Yes, my brother?
Okay, thank you, sir. I'm from Botswana.
Yes.
And, from the Ministry of Arts. And before I go to my comment, let me try to assist him too. Well, this is the second person who talked about AIDS since I came here to Botswana, about Botswana. Let me try to explain that we don't have much of a problem like any other African country when it comes to HIV/AIDS. It's only that our country became known because we are the first African country to assist each and every person who was infected with HIV free ARVs. And then because we did that, we came to be known as HIV, but doesn't mean that we've got such a large problem. But anyway, whatever intervention somebody wants to assist, we'll greatly take it. But that doesn't mean that everybody is HIV. Let me go to decolonization. Rosemary, I say Rosemary because I think this issue should try to assist us. We've been talking about Africanization, Africanity, and all those stuff. But we fail to understand this thing. We are saying we want to decolonize our countries. But what about the local colonization? Where I'm coming from in Botswana, you'll find that we've got about 20 cultures and languages, ethnic groups. But in schools, we only teach Setswana. So you'll find that in the rural areas, you'll be having students being taught in the dominant language. The teacher is not from the Tswana area. The area is not in the Tswana area, but we are being taught Setswana. And even the cultural studies Setswana. Which means now, those students, when they grow up and go out there, they are looking at life in the mirror of the dominant local language. So we are easily talking about Eurocentric. But I believe that most of our African countries, we have got very different cultural groups with different languages. What about those marginalized there? My sister yesterday talked about the eyeglasses, which were said they were not African enough. My bet will be that maybe the color coding and everything, it was only for the dominant tribe. And the rest felt like maybe it doesn't speak to me as a person from the other different tribes. So I'm saying, Rosemary, because you are from South Africa, and you've got, I think maybe you are doing well, maybe you can teach us, how did you manage that when it comes to this local decolonization, so that these other ethnic groups and their cultures, their creativity can be nurtured? And when it comes to funding, how do you navigate these different myriad cultures that are there? And again, when we look at our young ones here and the creative guys who are coming up, we are telling them that decolonize and all those stuff. I'll give you an example. Mutukuzi, yes, became successful in those countries, in German or whatever, in his own language. But when you look at Kenya, he became famous by writing in English. It's only after his success that when he started writing in Gikuyu. And now because he's writing in Gikuyu, people know him and they know how he thinks. That translating his books. But when you are a writer, just imagine, if you write in Bemba or you write in Kalanga, nobody will translate your book. And nobody will read it because they don't even know how you think. Therefore, when we talk about decolonization, let's try to put it in the context of international context and even the economic aspect. Would we make money when we decolonize? Would it make sense? And again, how does what we are saying is African fit into me? I'm Kalanga first, and then I become Botswana, and then I become an African. Thank you.
Somehow, I think they are cutting the mic when I want to cut you. But please, we have only less than 5 minutes. We have to break for lunch. Please, I have already established my list. My brother in white, Mr. Big Ben. Then I have the 4 hands here. Then we can give an opportunity for the panelists to wrap up, and then we can break for lunch.
Thank you. I'll try to be very brief. My name is Tulakang. I'm from the University of Botswana. I think I'll speak from a selfish point of view, from my own country. I think one of the things that Rosemary pointed out, I just want to highlight that because I'm in total agreement with that. I think insofar as taking the sector further, it is very important for us as the region, in each one of the countries, to have the appropriate institutional structures to propel the sector further. Unfortunately, in our country, really, we lack those basic institutional structures. I feel shameful that in 2018, my country does not have an arts council. And my heart bleeds because way back, I don't know what year it was, I was part of the delegation that negotiated the SADC protocol on culture, information, and sport. But then, how do we as a country, for instance, sign up to such protocols when we don't have perhaps the commitment to establish appropriate structures that will see to the implementation of that we have signed up to? And of course, it doesn't stop at the establishment of the structures. You must also put in place an appropriate policy that will then drive, that will direct the work of those particular structures. So for me, I think at the level of SADC, because I think that is what we've been talking about, if we could, at the level of SADC, hold our respective countries accountable as to what is it that you have done insofar as ensuring that the creative industries progress in your respective countries for the good of the entire region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, my brother. Please, again, I want the time to reduce as we go along. 30 seconds, and then we can pass. We have about 5 minutes to wrap up.
Yes,
sorry, the floor is coming to you just now.
Thank you. My name is Lloyd from the Kadudura Youth Skills Training Program that we are organizing. My first question is for Mr. Predrick. One of the biggest challenges we have is turning arts into an employment-creating entity. And like you said, the youth are more excited in participating in foreign projects and goods rather than our local goods. And I think one of the main problems, as well as lack of institutions as well, like you said, I think one of the biggest problems is decentralization as well. Now, the current institutions that are there, like IVACA and the National Arts Council, the institutions that are in place, how do they impact the the lowest level of the citizenship structure, the poorest of the poor? How do we get the information to the person in the middle of Havana, the artists that are there? How does this institutions impact or reach out to those institutions? Because if they get the information and also take part in this, in development and arts as well, I think then there can be much more excitement and creativity as well. The second question is about the comment that Mr. Molebatsi made about investing in you and me. The main problem that we are currently facing also in the art sector is lack of humanity. You know, we have lost track of the humanity part of arts, and that is mainly because we are focusing on the policy rather than the individual, because we are focusing on the legislation. What does the legislation or the policy that we made say? If it said send 500,000 to this school, that's what the policy is about. Following the policy, taking that 5,000, sending it to that school. But how do we get to the point where we put the focus on the creative individual, the individual? How do we invest in them? Thank you.
It's clear. Thank you so much, Mr. Big Ben.
Good morning. My name is Ben. I'm a musician from Namibia. I wanted to, from the panelists who are from art councils, in terms of your funding and how you spend it, I think at this point, I would have wanted us to start, because at the same time we say we shouldn't be treated like just another indulgence in society, right? We consume arts just to indulge because we have some free time and some free money. And that we should actually start moving into turning it into a business, from whether it's identifying the product, packaging it, identifying the customer, and selling it. But from the Arts Council, my question is, in our experience, we tend to fund it more like, we fund more charitable type of looking projects. The more people are involved in your project proposal, or your footprints, you know, how many, your target market for your, based on the templates of the funding applications and so on, the more you are considered to probably get something. But none of the money goes towards developing real business processes and getting into the commercial part of that. And therefore, it keeps us away from actually owning the right to exploit our artworks, which means we are leaving behind the main goal of the government, which gives the money to the Arts Council to, based on, you know, on all the treaties that they have signed. I think we should go back to there and not just fund for cosmetics purposes to look like 30,000 people have actually benefited. Have we gotten a distribution channel for the music, a distribution channel for the documentaries, for the what, you know? The business processes we don't pay attention to, and therefore, as an economic activity, we won't get there. Whereas the transport guy gets a road built for that person. That directly enables the person to make money. For arts, we just give you some money for refreshments at your training, you know. We need to look at the business side of it. That's my point.
Thank you so much. I will, with your permission, take that as a contribution for the Arts Council to consider projects that are premised on business principles, so that it becomes a revolving fund type of mechanism. So I'll take that as a comment, if you do not mind. I have my four colleagues here, starting there to the lady, my brother in the head, and then we can wrap up here. Sorry, I will not take everyone because we are already encroaching into the time for lunch. Let me give the floor, please, with your permission, and then we can wrap up the session.
Thank you.
Yes, please try to be brief. Thank you.
Thank you. JP van der Westhuizen, founder and owner of a company that focuses on indigenous knowledge and transferring it into commercialization. Yesterday's suit that I had on is a prototype of what we do with my company. Question is to IFACA and to the National Arts Council of Namibia. There's a challenge in the country currently, and I don't know whether you find that as a challenge, and I'm asking you, is it a challenge? Is the redundance of resources. The Ministry of Arts and Culture, they have their own program that they do nationally and regionally in arts and culture. The National Youth Council has what we call the Youth Expert that we do focused on arts and culture. And so we are doing something as the National Youth Council, the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture is doing something on arts and culture. What role do you play, and do you find that as a redundance because everyone is doing something on their own? And what are the opportunities that you see in that you can take along? And Ifaka, the reason why I asked that question is that the same sort of challenge that you find in SADC? And is there opportunity in terms of ensuring there's no redundance in resource mobilization? Thank you.
Yes. I think also maybe to tie that up so that we don't have to respond, I think Rosemary, right? Yes, touched on the creative sector being in different departments and therefore operating in silos. And I think you have somehow reflected on that. So if maybe we can take that for noting, so that I think what you were emphasizing is the coordination that needs to be improved so that these different entities speak to each other for the common interest. So if I can summarize your point that way, and we take it as a comment, which ties in what was already said. Yes. Yes, my sister.
Okay, Hannah Tarindwa, founder of the Writers Academy of Namibia. My question is to all national arts councils and the ones existing and the ones that are not. Is it possible for SADC at this moment, because the topic is opportunities and challenges faced by art councils, right? Is it possible from this summit for you guys to actually sit together and restructure the format of national arts councils so that they speak, like she was talking about, relevance to SADC, because we are here as SADC, and the basic structure. Rosemary spoke about the institutional arrangement. So my question is it possible to have a uniform structure of national arts councils so that when someone leaves Namibia, for example, I'm a Zimbabwean living here, but if I leave Namibia to go back to Zimbabwe or to South Africa or wherever, I can still approach the National Arts Council knowing that the departments are the same. And could you also include the foresight department, like the lady from Kenya alluded to yesterday, and the monitoring and evaluation departments? Because as a student of M&E, I have learned that what is not monitored is not done.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. My brother, and then I'll close off.
All right, my name is Jeffrey Mukubi. I'm an entertainment and lifestyle reporter for the Confidante newspaper, as well as the co-founder for the Kalahari International Festival of the Arts, which is basically just a festival that collaborates, that makes Namibian artists collaborate with international artists, including African and international, as well as I'm also the co-founder for the Namibia Arts Fair, which plays a role of actually a little mini economy for Namibian artists to actually make money from their art. This ties down to my question. I'm not skilled in any of them. I didn't study for any of those roles. I'm actually a radio production graduate. And Mr. Dean, you did say that art councils should start investing in human capital development. So my question is, what are the examples of the skills that government or the arts council should actually invest in to promote the growth in the arts sector? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hello, Mulibwanji. My name is Julia Taonga Kaseka. I come from Zambia. My questions are more related with Madam Monde. I would like to find out how does the government support in the infrastructure, the empty spaces that exist within Lusaka? How do you support the creative industry with these spaces? Number two is how do you create, Rosemary talked about it, the different funding, open calls towards the art institutions. How do you create these, or how do you choose people who get this funding? Is it more or less that people have to apply to get this funding? Because it's important to make it open to everybody, and then you can sort of filter in the people you want or don't want, or a different set of people, different set of provinces getting this funding. And then also with support with, I think, all the art centers is the taxing and of exchange of artists across borders. How do these, how can you reduce or how can you make it more accessible for artists to cross borders? Because the taxes are quite high that you do charge as national art councils to bring in international artists. So how do you make this accessible to us? Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was quite an engaging session. What I will do now, I will allow the panelists, influenced by the questions. I will start with Patrick, the $1 million question. I asked him if he's comfortable to answer. He said yes, so I'll give him the floor to respond to that, and then I will also guide you on the other questions.
Can I just summarize all my questions?
Yes, yes. So the one of the $1 million, the local goods and how that reaches the people.
I've got them.
You got them. Yeah. Please take them all.
Yeah. Quickly on the issue of salaries, I think research needs to be done in like NGO world. What is operational? What is it 20% of your total budget? You know, and I think in that we don't know what the breakdown is. So I think in terms of, we are creating employment because you are the ones creating employment. We just fuel you. You are the vehicle. So the employment creation is not up to us. We just there to create an enabling environment for that to happen. But it's up to you as the activists, as the citizens, to then create the employment. And when we can see how do we sustain it, how do we scale it, how do we improve it, that type of thing. And also in terms of when you go looking for money, the way you create your model is also interesting. So if you say Standard Bank, can you sponsor $100 a child? You know that $100 is $10 your management fee, $5 your electricity. So you need to find exciting and interesting ways to capture that cost so that it doesn't look like it's an operational cost. Okay? The theft question, what happened? So when we got in, there were no financial reports from 7 years. Right, so the last time there was a financial audit was in financial year ending 2013. So we first had to allow for the audit process to take place. We've literally just finished that process about 2 to 3 months ago. We've handed over the files to the Auditor Report, to the Auditor General's office. We've had meetings with them just so that we can finalize that process. When the audit came out, there was obviously a clear indication of theft, the reason why the initial counsel was suspended. That case got reported to the ACC. ACC then obviously instigated a police report, and I think that's where the challenge lies now, the police investigation in terms of is there enough evidence from the Prosecutor General's office to prosecute. So I think now we've done all, in our capacity, we've handed over to the necessary authorities. They must then make the decision to prosecute. I don't think that's the responsibility of the Art Council. Okay, decentralization. What's interesting about decentralization is how we do it. Like we acknowledge in principle it needs to be done. Because of the historical neglect, either the people's proposals aren't good enough, either it's in English, but there's a lot of kind of habitual challenges when you have to decentralize. So we found a way to try and actually strengthen that by formalizing partnerships. So if you look outside, some of them are there. So for instance, we've signed one with Hota in Rundu. And art necessarily, when you're talking about making money out of it, it's very easy because art has to bring out a lived experience. So you must either have a music festival or you have an exhibition or the product is there. So the point is, how do we determine the value around that product? So the way we did decentralization, and we're going to do it increasingly, is through partnerships. So we've already sponsored the Ochivarongo OTEC Art Center. We've sponsored COSTEF in terms of making sure that they become certified in the courses, because then as a student you want to go there more, and then therefore it becomes. So Ben, I agree and I disagree with you when you say that we're not focused. I think we're not at scale yet. That's necessary in terms of supporting the business side, but I think we have that vision in place. We've also supported OTAC, COSTEF, NTN, which all have a decentralized kind of mandate as well. So we're dealing with that. In terms of impact, and what the question was here, how do we impact it? I think part of the challenge here is that we need to change this idea of binary. It's either that or this. It's usually both of them. The question is how we do it, to what scale. So you have to look at the individual, but you have to look at policy. Because policy determines what the country prioritizes. So if you're not prioritized there, the trickle down is that you won't be prioritized at the individual level because there's not enough resources, and we have to spend it in terms of capacity, building, infrastructure, scholarships, bursaries. So the needs are a lot. So you have to find a financing formula in terms of how those funds are going to be redistributed. So it's a lot in terms of policy management, and I think artists need to start understanding macroeconomic environments so that you are not frustrated or discontent with what's happening in that space. And when you vote, you vote for politicians that understand your cause. Okay? My final part was around how do we restructure? Just earlier on, one of our suggestions from the IFACA meeting is to start a static art fund. So each council will then provide it so we can look at issues around how do we allow mobility funds amongst each other. But there's already a suggestion out of here to start something and then talk about the dynamics of how can we, as the different art councils, kind of contribute towards that. Jeff's questions on skill deficit. I think it was answered in the arts education kind of conversation that we had. There is a skills deficit, but it's not unique to our sector. I think it's a national problem in all the other various sectors. So I think it needs to be like what is the national response towards the HR deficiencies that are happening in the country. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much. I think Mr. Patrick Sem have answered most of the questions. I will now give the other panelists 1 minute each, respond to what was directed to you, and in that same breath, close off so that we can go and eat. Please. Yes, my sister.
Thank you, Moderator. The question on support to the creative industry in terms of structures, I think back home, we have the structures, but they may not be in a position that is friendly to the artists. So as at now, particularly in the capital in Lusaka, we have old structures, the Lusaka Playhouse, for example, but it needs a lot of attention. And we desire that the artists themselves can bring ideas to the table so that we improve on some of the structures. But around the country, there are several cultural villages that are intended to attract the artists to exhibit and actually be able to sell their products. So the cultural villages are scattered all over the country in each provincial capital. When it comes to how we choose beneficiaries, I think this one, there is no specific fund for artists. We have generally funded. And as such, we have to sit down and prioritize what goes to the artists. And lastly, enabling artists to cross borders. I think this actually gets back to the artists themselves. You need to be creative enough to bring up your proposals. They be analyzed, assessed, and we have no problem, I think, crossing. Although, of course, there's a feeling that Zambian artists don't normally get accepted. But I think that is something that will be addressed even from this conference. So bring up your proposals to the table. If they are satisfactory enough, they are funded. And with this regional cooperation now, regional integration, there should be no serious problem to make you cross the borders.
Thank you so much. Rosemary?
Thank
Another
you.
1 minute.
I'll be very quick, and I'd like to actually answer in the context of what needs to happen next. Remember that we have to come out with resolutions from this conference. Regional integration is one of them. A funding, mobility fund is one of them. How we're going to be working across countries is one of them. And we would then need, and we have left out a very important component, and that is of other strategic partners like business. Yeah, we haven't said anything about how we're going to be integrating businesses into becoming our structural partners, because without the necessary resourcing, we won't be able to get what we would like to get. Absolutely. And I'm concerned that in terms of the program itself, we were supposed to have breakaway sessions. And one of those panels, which I was going to chair, has got to do with how business will be brought in as a partner. So we seem to have lost that time. Having said that, funding for impact is very important, and therefore measuring for impact is important. Yeah. So it doesn't help and to think that we can ever be sustainable if we don't fund for impact. In other words, by the time we fund you, we know what you are going to be impacting, and we know how we're going to be monitoring and evaluating that impact, so that then we know whether it is sustainable or not, so that you don't have to come back over and over again. And the Cultural Observatory, the reason why we had that whole presentation on the Cultural Observatory is it's also important to collate information and have a repository of this information that can then inform the value that the cultural and creative industries are adding. It's also about creating value and measuring this value. And by creating value, whatever it is that we fund should be answering to, does it have an economic value? Does it have an educational value? Does it have a health value? Does it have an environmental value? Does it have a social justice value? Does it have an inclusive value? And so on and so forth. So it's about setting up criteria for value so that we're able to measure value and value add in everything that we actually do. So I think in summary, that's what I'll say, because I'm hoping that instead of having lunch, we'll be consolidating the inputs and seeing what we can actually build in terms of what we have left out in discussions.
Yes. Thank you so much. My brother Dean, please, you have 1 minute.
Thank you.
Yes.
Probably more than enough. I think the whole issue of skills deficit and what needs to be done or what skills you want to invest in as a country, it's not something I can determine myself as a person, but I think research around what skill gaps there are in the country needs to be done. And once that is done, I think then we can successfully determine where we should put the largest amount of resources in terms of closing those gaps. And I think the Arts Council will be well placed to do that. And this is a problem across the continent, and I think it's a major problem even in my country. So it's not unique to any country at all. You know, my brother from Botswana spoke to the whole dominance of languages of others over others, and I'm glad to say, you know, the new president whom we met about a month ago sounded very positive about this whole issue. He really does think that it is about time we really looked at how we have approached the whole issue of language, so to speak. So I hope that something will come out of them. I wasn't sure I understood the comment about arts councils speaking to SADC. I wanted to try and create a response in my mind, but I couldn't. But I was interested in that comment. How do we really invest in the individual? I think the point I was trying to make earlier was that the much as government has responsibility and the arts councils have to invest in skills development and all that, the point I was trying to make was that the individual must take pride in investing in themselves to create the necessary skills needed for the market at a particular time, and that's staying relevant, as Rosemary said earlier. Because you cannot, because you are a graphic designer who trained in 1985, think you'd still be relevant today. You have got to go with the time, so you have got to be investing money, and then you know. So I would think that's one of the things that we have to be looking to do. The whole issue of the budget, I was very keen on this issue of the budget ending up in the hands of people who live in the cities, because we have a similar problem. How do we distribute? And I think this was an interesting issue that maybe I would like to discuss, take it up further with Patrick, and see how they are doing it here, because I think we have a similar problem of, that small budget ending up in the hands of the same guys. And those guys live in the city, actually. They are not out in the bundus. That's, again, where there's a lot of creative work going on, which goes unrecognized because they are never able to even reach the markets necessary to be well known. Yes. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of our panel discussion on the challenges and opportunities for the creative sector.